You're listening to the Resilient Fertility Podcast, a space where we explore the intersection of food and culture on the journey to motherhood. I'm Anissa Woodall, a holistic certified nutritionist and mother of two adventurous boys. Join me as I guide you on how to reconnect with your innate wisdom, develop a growth mindset, and harness the power of food and habit to embody the mother your child needs you to be. Whether you're planning to become a mother, trying to conceive, or are already a mother, you'll find valuable insights and practical tips to enhance your fertility and optimize your pregnancy. Tune in every other week for thoughtful and informative conversations about the power in your hands on your journey to motherhood. If you're lying awake at 2 a.m, whisper Googling how to know when I'm done having babies while your child quietly snoozes in the background, this episode is for you. Maybe you're feeling like your youngest just turned 2 and you're not really sure if your family feels complete. Perhaps part of you misses newborn snuggles. Or there's also the part of you that finally loves sleeping through the night again. Maybe you're thinking, I'm 37, the biological clock is ticking, but I'm emotionally torn. I don't know if I want to have another one. Maybe you might feel the fear creeping up of possibly having some sense of regret of not having another child. We recently returned from a week at a Baha'i family summer camp, and it was really just the best. Not only were there so many meaningful connections and musical talents that so many people shared, but the youth in particular, specifically the teenage boys, welcomed my sons with open arms. My 4-year-old especially was so drawn to them. He was totally well behaved in the gatherings while he was sitting with them. And when he was with me, he was so impatient, wiggly, and distracted. He's reached that point in his development where he wants to be with the quote, cool kids. And being with mom is not so cool anymore, which I can accept. Although at the time we were still with the kids at the camp at meal times and bedtimes and transition times, it felt like I hadn't really parented in the modern sense of the word. There were rarely any situations where conflict would arise that needed parental intervention. It felt like such a welcome break. As soon as we returned home, however, it took some reintegration time, and it really makes me wonder how much of modern parenting in isolation is such a wild and unnatural phenomenon. We all understand conceptually the value of the village, but seeing it in action was so tempting to recreate more of that at home. And I wonder how much of this plays into people's family planning. I know for me, if we had more help, we would both be much more open to bringing in another child. And that brings us to today's topic. Are you done having children? That's actually a question my mother-in-law asked me a little while ago. She asked if we were planning on having more children, and if we weren't, was I going to get my tubes tied? Honestly, I was a little appalled by this question, as it's never really something that's crossed my mind. Her question kind of slammed me back into how foreign accidental pregnancy feels after 13 years of charting my cycle. Because after practicing the fertility awareness method for 13 years now, I know my fertility like the back of my hand. And this is after I naturally and confidently avoided pregnancy for 5 years before we felt ready to have kids. I conceived both my children on the first try because I knew when I was ovulating and because I took care of my health in advance of trying to be able to ovulate with regularity and know that my body was in a place to be able to conceive healthfully. And I continued to avoid pregnancy while I was postpartum by charting my fertility signs. That's not to say that my fertility was always optimal or that it was because I was young when I conceived. I used to have a non-existent libido at age 18, zero indication of a fertile period, and debilitating period cramps, PMS, and fatigue. I was still ovulating, but my body was giving me other signs that my hormones and fertility were not where they needed to be. But after making intentional diet and lifestyle changes like the ones I now teach in my Resilient Motherhood course for women preparing to conceive, I was able to restore both my hormonal vitality and optimize my fertility so that when I was ready, conception was a breeze and my pregnancies were so healthy. My postpartum recovery went great as well. And I'm so thankful that I started preparing in advance, not just for conception, but because it led to strong, vibrant pregnancies and healthy births. I want every woman to experience that same level of confidence and well being. If you're not planning to conceive just yet, but you want to start learning more about the fertility awareness method, I cover everything you need to know inside of my Ovulation Mastery self paced course. It's for women who want to understand their cycles, avoid pregnancy naturally, and make informed choices without relying on hormonal birth control or surgery. You can get started with my free guide, the Ovulation Confidence Quick Start Guide for Beginners. It's linked in the show notes. So I've had a bunch of questions submitted from people on my Instagram stories requesting I share more about this topic. So this is where the topic of this episode came from. And I want to get into some of the questions that people had asked. So the first one is, what went into your decision to have children and to be done? First of all, to have children, this could be a really long answer, but I've always viewed myself in preparation to be a mother. And I was raised that way. My faith, as I've shared in some of the previous episodes, my faith has played a big role in shaping my vision of the role of the mother. But this has always been something that I've prepared for my whole life. And perhaps I'll share a quote from the Baha'i writings about the purpose of marriage and family life. It's probably what's most important to consider when it comes to this question is your own personal spiritual beliefs on the purpose of marriage and family life. Abdu'l-Baha says, in quotes, "The husband and wife are brought into affinity, are united and harmonized even as though they were one person. Through their mutual union, companionship, and love, great results are produced in the world, both material and spiritual. The spiritual result in the appearance of divine bounties. The material result is the children who are born in the cradle of the love of God, who are nurtured by the breast of the knowledge of God, who are brought up in the bosom of the gift of God, and who are fostered in the lap of the training of God. Such children are those of whom it was said by Christ, 'Verily they are the children of the kingdom.'" End quote. So that personally shapes my own vision of the role of marriage and the role of family life, is to really bring people into the world to have a relationship with God and to serve God. And to serve God is to serve humanity. And so, to answer the second part of that question, what goes into our decision to be done? I really think it's multifactorial and it is so personal to your family, your marriage, your support network, and we'll get into it. But first of all, finances, right? We're just going to be pragmatic here. Finances are a real concern when it comes to expanding your family. Eating well on its own is not cheap, and feeding a growing family high quality food can be even more costly. So only you and your husband can determine if you truly have the financial capacity to support your family. Now, I can do my very best in helping you to learn how to eat well on a budget and make the most of your budget. But in reality, like, you are going to be spending more on food when you try to be healthy. And there's lots of free ways to be healthy too. It's not to say that finances should be the barrier. Another factor is your bandwidth. You might be thinking, I don't want to resent one more postpartum night feed, or how am I going to get the rest I need during the day with no support? Creating a support network of some kind is so important for your postpartum wellness. I know for myself, my mom helped out a couple of times a week to take my older child so that I could just stay home and be with the baby. Now, it gets harder as the baby grows up, and having one person manage two, a toddler and a baby, sometimes always isn't optimal. You might also think, what if another pregnancy derails the health that I just reclaimed? I know for a lot of women, going through pregnancy and birth really challenges their health and their resilience. And sometimes you can feel like you've just gotten back into a flow and a rhythm, and that you feel like pregnancy can derail that. I personally would view it in a different way, not to say that I would view pregnancy as an opportunity for growth, because pregnancy and birth as an opportunity for growth. And you can always regain health. That's so personally, I don't feel like that's ever been a concern for me. And there's always things that we can do to help mitigate and prevent some of the ways that perhaps pregnancy and birth may have challenged your body in the past. I think an important question also to consider is, can I still nurture quality and not just quantity? The Baha'i teachings say that every child is potentially the light of the world, and at the same time, it's darkness. And so for me, this is why parental presence and environmental influences are so important. So you need to ask yourself, can I still nurture that quality over quantity? I know that I've seen families where there's lots of children, but each individual child, you can see that they are missing in some ways or lacking in some ways. And so that's perhaps one of the reasons why raising your first child, quote, right, or as best you could, will have implications for how the rest of your children are grown up. Because if their primary influence, as the older child, the younger children are going to be looking up to that older child as their primary influence. And so, yeah, doing your best to make sure that your children have what they need to grow into high quality people. If you're just going to be sending them to a daycare or with people who aren't prioritizing their emotional development, their spiritual development, then I probably wouldn't recommend having more children. One of the things I have within my Resilient Motherhood course is a future self visualization. So seeing yourself 5 years out on your motherhood journey and really trying to envision what that looks like for you. That exercise alone has really helped a lot of my clients to feel at peace with their choice and their decision, regardless of which decision they made. Because I've definitely had people join Resilient Motherhood and choose not to have children, but they did want to preserve their fertility for as long as they could so that they did have that option. If you're over 35 and you're leaning into maybe a yes, the timeline for egg quality optimization is real. That's why I'm actually working on a new offering for how to build better eggs in 90 days so that your indecision doesn't become unintended infertility. I'm opening up the wait list for the first time right now in the show notes, so you can keep a lookout soon for a free webinar on this topic so that you can maintain your fertility until you feel ready to make a decision. Another question was it a process, and how did you discern when you were done? So my husband and I, we had initially only wanted 2 children. I went into my last pregnancy knowing that this would be my last. But now, as our youngest child is nearly 4.5, and I get a literal high every time I hold a newborn, I am starting to reconsider that. I'd never really considered having another child until I was visiting a prior fertility client to bring her some bone broth when she was immediately postpartum. And although I had no expectations to even see her, she welcomed me in and immediately put a baby in my hands. Now, when I left, we got back into the car and I told my oldest son, who's now 7, I said, wow, I didn't remember how good it felt to hold a newborn baby. And I said, I was just feeling so good, so blissful after holding that baby. And what he said to me was, it's okay if you want to have another one, Mom. And I looked at him, I said, what? He's like, I really want a sister. He thought my second child was going to be a sister. And so I had him tell me more about that. We talked about remembering what it was like when his younger brother was a baby, and all of the things we had to sacrifice to be able to welcome that baby in. And I know he's only 7, but he was like, I know, Mom, I know what it was like, and I still want it. And so that kind of opened the door for me to just consider the possibility. And there's definitely a part of me that can't imagine continuing to have fertility for likely the next 10 plus years without taking action on it. That part of me feels both sad at the possibility of not getting to give more of the most beautiful kind of love to another baby, but it is also grateful to be in this position of getting to choose when so many women don't have that option. So personally, the door isn't closed, and I am open to the possibility should my husband have a change in heart. and I do need his support because our marriage comes first. I'm speaking for my husband here, but I think that he feels he's at his threshold for how much he can give to provide for us, to serve his many patients as a naturopathic doctor because he does give his all, and to be the best father that I've ever seen. We have a really great home dynamic where he takes on all of the parenting once he's home after I've been home with the kids most of the day. And our children so look forward to spending time with him at the end of the day and on the weekends. I think that he feels like if we had a baby, he would have to sacrifice the quality of parenting and support for me that he would be able to provide. So, for those of you who are in the same kind of boat, trying to discern the right answer for you, I highly recommend praying about it, meditating, visualizing, and dreaming. These are all important parts of coming to a conclusion if you feel the need to have one. But you don't always have to have a clear answer. And in the end, God does have the absolute power. My prayer is that any gift of a child would be welcomed with open arms for you and your husband, and that it's coming into a peaceful
would be
marriage.
welcomed with open. Now, unfortunately, there are times when sudden losses may reopen the question of family size.
I had a friend experience the devastating loss of her 10-year-old daughter. She had said her family had felt complete and they didn't plan on having any more kids. But at 40, she was still with a regular cycle. And for the first time, she and her husband were thinking about keeping that option open, especially considering that their son was now an only child. So she joined Resilient Motherhood to keep the door open and rebuild her reserves just in case she felt the pull to try for another. This is something that I think is important to consider and is a hard thing to consider. We never want to imagine the loss of one of our children. But for me personally, to just think that if that had happened to me and my tubes were tied, for example, that possibility wouldn't be open anymore and would definitely be something to grieve the potential of. So this is something that I bring up to help you reflect on what it is you truly want and envision for your future. If you're in a similar place where your cycle is still humming, but you're unsure, you too can choose to join Resilient Motherhood, which gives you the complete roadmap to preserve that option without pressure. Because the worst that could happen is you delay the onset and severity of common perimenopause symptoms like night sweats, mood swings, and cycle chaos, and continue reaping the protective benefits of regular ovulation, like stronger bones, a sharper mind, a more stable mood. Supporting your fertility now doesn't force a decision. It just keeps the door open while building hormonal resilience for whatever comes next. Now, if you're leaning more on the side of feeling complete, you might be wondering, should I practice the fertility awareness method or take more permanent measures? Coming back to the comment that my mother-in-law had made about me getting my tubes tied, though I had never considered it just because I was confident in my cycle, it's always important for me to look to my religious guidance as well. And when asked about expanding a family and contraception, the Universal House of Justice, which is the administrative body for the Baha'i Faith, it advises, in quotes, "You and your husband, therefore, should have no feeling that you are obliged to add to your already large family. This is a matter entirely for you to decide, and there are many methods of preventing conception, including self-discipline and restraint." And I'm adding this part, fertility awareness method, to which you can have recourse. Sterilization, however, would be a more far-reaching action than any of these, with implications and results beyond those necessary for the immediate purpose of limiting the size of your family. It is not permissible in Baha'i law, except in rare instances where it is necessary for a medical reason. End quote. So although I wouldn't choose this for myself, let's touch on permanent contraception for a minute, because if you're leaning towards being done, this question does eventually come up. Should one of us get it done? You might ask. Here's what many people don't realize. Vasectomy is often framed as the easier option, and in many ways it is. It's less invasive, it's done under local anesthesia with minimal downtime, but it's not immediate. There's a window post op, typically around 3 months or 20 ejaculations, where viable sperm can still be present. If you're not using backup protection during that time, pregnancy can still happen. And vasectomy failure, while potentially rare, does still occur. And that's usually where the severed tubes reconnect. I know someone personally who had a vasectomy. Then they got pregnant after the vasectomy. He had it redone. Then they got pregnant with twins after the vasectomy. Honestly, I think the fertility awareness method or condoms would have been a more effective option for them. I will share some of the success statistics in a minute. So, tubal ligation for women, on the other hand, is a more invasive procedure that usually requires general anesthesia, abdominal incisions, and much longer recovery time. While it's considered more, quote, permanent, it also comes with potential downsides. Post-tubal ligation syndrome, which some women report as increased pain, hormonal shifts or cycle changes, surgical risks, and regret, especially if done under pressure or at a younger age. What I always encourage women to consider is that permanent contraception doesn't restore your body's balance. It ends its natural rhythm. And when we suppress or shut down that rhythm without resolving the root causes of potential hormone imbalances or fatigue, low libido, we often feel worse and not better. That's why I personally believe that the fertility awareness method is such a powerful tool. It lets you avoid pregnancy naturally with no side effects while staying in deep connection with your body. You can always choose a permanent path later, but you can't unchoose it once it's done. So let's talk numbers, because I know some of you are thinking, is the fertility awareness method actually reliable, or am I just asking for a surprise baby? When practiced consistently and correctly, the fertility awareness method has a success rate of up to 98 to 99%, which puts it right on par with hormonal birth control. The key words here are consistently and correctly. That means tracking your cervical fluid, basal body temperature, and your cycle patterns daily, knowing how to identify your fertile window accurately, and either avoiding sex or using protection during that time. And when using protection, using it correctly. Where most people go wrong is trying to sort of chart or relying on an app prediction without real biofeedback, or relying on cervical mucus only and not confirming ovulation, because there are times when you can produce cervical mucus for a couple of days, but perhaps you haven't ovulated, and then you produce cervical mucus again, and then you do ovulate. If you have intercourse during the time that you are producing cervical mucus and maybe you think you are done ovulating, surprise. So it's not something you do loosely. It is something that you do have to commit to. Now, if you're in a season where abstaining during your fertile window feels unrealistic or just not aligned with your relationship, you absolutely can use barrier methods like condoms during that time. Is it quite as effective as abstaining? Not exactly, but when used properly, high quality condoms have a typical use effectiveness of around 85% and up to 98% with perfect use. When you combine that with the awareness and timing precision of the fertility awareness method, you're dramatically reducing the chance of unintended pregnancy without needing hormones or surgical intervention. And the good news is that when you learn fertility awareness through a real framework, like the kind I teach inside of Ovulation Mastery, you don't have to guess. You actually understand your body so that you're not just trusting a chart, you're trusting yourself. And that's true sovereignty over your fertility. And not only that, you can use that body literacy to then make decisions about your lifestyle, your exercise, your food, and scheduling your social events so that you can know, oh, maybe I'm not going to schedule this outing on my period because I know that's going to be happening, or I want to schedule this specific event during my ovulation period, which is definitely what I do. I schedule all of my things around my cycles, and it's just become second nature for me. So, when it comes to contraception, it's important to build a strategy that works for your relationship, your comfort level, and your phase of life. There's no one right way to do it, just your informed choice. Now, you might be wondering, what if I'm too scattered to chart my cycle? And I just have to say, it's a pretty short answer. Discipline and adulting. I'm just going to tell you straight, you're going to have discipline if you want to use this method. I'm always referencing the phrase by Jocko Willink, discipline equals freedom, because when you have the discipline to chart your cycle, you have the freedom to live your life off of external hormones like birth control pill. You have the freedom to not have a irreversible surgery that sterilizes you. So you're going to have to make a decision. Are you willing to be a responsible adult and take ownership and take charge of your fertility, which is the greatest gift that we have, that, like I said, supports not only our ability to procreate, but to also feel vital and healthy in our bodies for as long as possible until we hit menopause. Now, if you're wondering, like maybe you've already started taking your temperatures, or perhaps when you do start, you notice that your temperatures are all over the place, that's really important information. And what I teach inside Resilient Motherhood or with my one-on-one clients can help us to see improvements and normalization in the wonky temperature trends, because those temperatures are telling us something. And it's up to us to take action on that biofeedback to help our body come to a place of better hormonal vitality. Sometimes with my one-on-one clients, I do hormone testing like the Dutch test, and that can also point to underlying imbalances resulting in hormones being out of balance. Working with an educator in fertility awareness can help you get clear on how to read your specific chart. So I'd encourage that if you do notice that your temperatures are all over the place and you don't feel confident using it as a contraceptive method. I also get a lot of questions about fertility tech, specifically people asking, should I use the temp drop or an Aura ring? So the temp drop for me, hands down, is the best starter tool if your goal is to track basal body temperature, or BBT, accurately for fertility awareness. It's worn on your upper arm while you sleep and adjusts for movement and environmental factors, which makes it ideal for postpartum women, night shift sleepers, or irregular sleepers, or simply if you just wake up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and realize I can't take my temperature in the morning because I woke up. This is because the temp drop gives you a smoothed out, refined reading, pulling from what the algorithm believes is your most accurate reading. And it removes this stress of needing to temp at exactly the same time every morning to get your temperatures. The Aura ring, on the other hand, tracks your temperature trends, not your true basal body temperature. It usually gives you information based on variation from baseline. And it can give you valuable insight into sleep, readiness, and overall health, but it's not specifically designed for fertility charting. On its own, it's not a replacement for traditional basal body temperature charting if you're trying to avoid or achieve pregnancy using the fertility awareness method. You can, however, pair the Aura ring with the Natural Cycles app, which is FDA cleared for birth control and does use temperature trends from the ring to estimate fertile days. I do have an affiliate link for Natural Cycles, and I know some women absolutely love it, especially if they already use an Aura ring. But personally, the higher ongoing subscription fee of Natural Cycles and the favorable way that Temp Drop captures temperature makes Temp Drop an easy yes for me, especially because Temp Drop is specifically designed for fertility tracking. It filters out disturbances like night wakings or restlessness and gives me a much more accurate picture of my cycle. So if you're serious about using the fertility awareness method to either avoid or achieve pregnancy and you want precision without the mental load, Temp Drop is still my top recommendation. You can get an additional 15% off of sale prices with my code AF Anissa Woodall, and I will link both of the options, both to Natural Cycles as well as Temp Drop, in the show notes so that you can explore what works best for you. And I do highly recommend reviewing my free ovulation confidence quick start guide for beginners, which is also linked in the show notes. Okay, the last question that I'm going to answer that the listener submitted is, what is the best age gap and why? Honestly, I could record an entire episode on this, and maybe I will, but age gap preferences are super personal with considerations given to developmental stages, maternal recovery, sibling bonding, parental bandwidth, support network, and so much more. I will start with saying that the World Health Organization shares that an age gap of 3 to 5 years globally appears to be most associated with the best infant and maternal outcomes. Now, That, of course, is epidemiological research, right? Looking at everyone and not considering individual factors. I will say,
We do
based
have
on
it's
the
designed to
available
help you build
research, I
better eggs
personally
in 90
wouldn't
days, not
have an
phase two. And I'll be
inter-pregnancy
starting
interval
out with a
less
free
than two
webinar.
years,
So
meaning two
it's a
years
free
between
webinar to get
pregnancies.
started. So stay tuned
With
for that.
that said, I know some people personally who have had multiple children when their babies were only 1 year old. Can it be done? Sure. Is it optimal? Probably not. And intentional maternal nutrient replenishment is crucial, especially if you're wanting a smaller age gap. I know that this is something of concern for women who are having children on the later side of their fertility. And they say, I want to have 2 or 3 children or 4 children or however many children, but I need to have them closer together in order to make it work with my fertility timeline.
Of course, we never know when our fertility is going to
And there are steps we can take to extend our reproductive longevity. However, the most important thing is maternal nutrient replenishment because it is very nutritionally expensive to have babies, and the baby will take from the mother what it doesn't get in the mother's diet. I will personally say, just to answer, because people were asking about my own feelings on this topic. Personally, after having 2 children, I fully agree with the WHO recommendation of 3 to 5 years for a lot of reasons, mostly related to the emotional and physical independence of the prior child and my own independence to take care of myself to be the best mom that I can be. Meaning that I feel like my children, both of them, needed me very closely, both for nursing, but also for emotional support, for navigating feelings and nap times and lots of things. I felt like they needed me really closely for, at the very least, the first 3 years. But even my son, who's now 4.5, I'm feeling like, oh, okay, I could see myself being pregnant and having a baby when he's this age. But he's 4.5, right? So a much bigger age gap than probably most American women are having for a lot of reasons. Now, I know that if we had children closer together, my husband and I would have to make significant compromises to our work, our chores, our community service, and our wellness activities. I gave birth to my second child when my first was 3.5, and that felt like the earliest I would have wanted to do it. Even then, I sacrificed my need and desire to have afternoon naps with my baby at the time in order to have one on one time with my oldest. There's always going to be some kind of compromise that you need to make. And it's just a matter of sorting out your support network and your routines to work best for you and your family. I've always loosely half joked with my husband saying that it would be a lot easier to have another child if we had a live in nanny. But in reality, your older children do get older too, and they can be very helpful as well. So I don't want to close the door for some people who feel like maybe they don't have enough help, and to recognize if you do have older children, you can call on them to support you in many ways too. And that prepares them for their own family life. So ultimately, what's best is what aligns with your own personal maternal recovery and your family resilience. So to wrap this up, I want you to ask yourself a few questions. If a healthy, uncomplicated pregnancy were guaranteed, which technically it's not, but if it were, would you want another child? And by doing your very best in supporting your body to do that, would you be open to having another child? Another question I would ask is, what do I fear losing or gaining by expanding or concluding our family? And am I nurturing my fertility now so the future me has a real choice? I hope that you continue to ponder and reflect on these questions through the rest of the day. And to help you feel more ready for any of the decisions that you come to, I have a stack of offerings to help you along the way. If you want to finally understand what your temperatures are telling you and how to get started with measuring your basal body temperature and to know for sure if you actually ovulated, grab my free guide, The Ovulation Confidence Quick Start for Beginners, in the show notes. If you need real confidence using the fertility awareness method without relying on guesswork or app predictions, my self-paced course, Ovulation Mastery, teaches you how to track your cycle with clarity and trust. For women over 35, if you're trying to improve your egg quality, but you're not sure where to start, I'd highly encourage you to join the waitlist for my new course that's designed to help you build better eggs in 90 days naturally. And I'll be starting out with a free webinar to get started. Stay tuned for that. And if you're ready to actively support every part of your fertility, both from learning how to chart your cycles to knowing what to do with what you notice from the biofeedback of your cycles, while you figure out if more children are in your future, my signature program, Resilient Motherhood, gives you the tools to preserve your options, boost your hormonal vitality, and feel confident in your body again. Doors open seasonally, so join the waitlist in the show notes. Thanks for being here. I'd love to hear if you have any comments or questions. Send me a message on Instagram at Anissa Woodall Nutrition. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much for listening today. I really do appreciate you choosing to spend this time with me. If you gained value from today's episode, I'd love if you can act in reciprocity and share this episode with a friend. Screenshot your favorite part and share it on your social media, tagging me at Anissa Woodall Nutrition, or leave a review in Apple Podcasts. This serves me to expand my reach of connecting with women who need to know that they have more power over their journey to motherhood than they may think. I'll see you on the next one. I hope you already know, but for legal purposes, I need to share that this podcast is for general informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute the giving of medical advice. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast are at the user's own risk. Each user is responsible for making their own decisions when it comes to their reproductive health. Remember, you are always the sole authority over your health, and if your case requires medical attention, use your own discretion to ensure that your needs are met. Thank you for listening.